to cheer me up, the publisher presented the front page of the book. So
publicly?
No, to me, to see what I think and their ideas of how the front page of the book, the cover.
And how was it?
Yeah, well, they gave me 10 different ones, so I could choose, and I like immediately.
Хто є зараз в залі, і раді тим, хто підключився до нас онлайн.
We're happy to see everyone present in the room now, and we are happy to see our online participants as well. We are starting our JustTalk today. It's going to be an atypical event for us. Very often we say that JustTalk is a platform where in a very limited circle of experts we can discuss relevant questions, issues, and maybe come up with solutions for the system of criminal justice. And normally we discuss topics, issues, and solutions that do not necessarily fit into the realm of our work as an organization. But today we will be discussing investigative interview. It's a standard approach, methodology, and topic that we've been working with for a while now. My name is Vasylyna Yavorska. I'm the head of JustGroup, and I'm going to be the facilitator of our today's conversation. We are going to be looking at an investigative interview from two differing angles. It's a leading approach of interviews during pre-trial investigation stage, and this is a case where Ukraine can already maybe put several checks on the checklist because we already have some experience in using this leading approach. And together with a team of experts that will be part of the expert panel discussion, we will talk about this experience. We will discuss the lessons learned during the implementation stage of investigative interview in the work of pre-trial investigation bodies and prosecutors' offices in Ukraine. But if we look at the surface, we can clearly see that there is some progress which is still insignificant. So let's think about things that we could do together so that an investigative interview becomes the main basic standard of work for any Ukrainian investigator or prosecutor. While developing the practice of introducing investigative interview in Ukraine, we were happy to be partnered up with the Norwegian Center for Human Rights and the University of Oslo. We've been partnering up for more than 3 years now, and they are the leaders in advocating and promoting of this standard on a global level. And for us, they are this immense source of expertise, inspiration, and we are very grateful for this partnership. And today's Just Talk is taking place in partnership with the University of Oslo and the Norwegian Center for Human Rights. And before we actually proceed to our today's discussion, I will be happy to give the floor to the representatives of the Norwegian Center for Human Rights. We will first hear Katarina, who is the coordinator for the project on investigative interview in Ukraine, and she's been helping us a lot so that the activities planned could be implemented in Ukraine. Katarina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Vasylyna. I hope you all can hear me. Yes, I see a thumb up. Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's a true honor to be with you here today for this discussion on implementing investigative interviewing in Ukraine. My name is Katarina, and I work at the Norwegian Center for Human Rights at the University of Oslo. And I am the project coordinator in our collaboration with JustGroup, as Vasylyna just mentioned. Firstly, I wanted to thank JustGroup for bringing us all together for this important conversation. Your work in creating such platforms for sharing insights and experiences is vital for making progress in the field of justice. So this gathering is more than just a meeting. It reflects our shared commitment for supporting Ukraine towards a fair and more effective law enforcement system. Your presence here today, particularly when facing the extreme challenges faced by Russia's aggression, shows your resilience, dedication, and courage to uphold justice and human rights. So, I wanted to start by saying something about our joint project and the important steps we have made so far. Our collaboration started several years ago and is today supported by the Nansen Support Program for Ukraine. Through this initiative, the NCHR is supporting JustGroup along with Ukrainian police, investigators and prosecutors in their efforts to improve the quality of interviews and investigations. So we are working towards ensuring the highest quality of evidence and legal proceedings, while at the same time increasing the protection against wrongful conviction, abuse of power, and torture. This work aims to strengthen Ukraine's practices, to better align them with international human rights standards, best practices, and also making the investigations more effective. So what we do, we connect JustGroup and Ukrainian law enforcement with experts. These experts are primarily from the UK and Norway. They are pioneers in the field of investigative interviewing. And we rely on these experts for advice, policy recommendation, and teaching. And this provides Ukrainian law enforcement with access to knowledge and training derived from well-established research. Another key aspect of our project is the train-the-trainer principle. This approach aims to strengthen the capabilities of the core group of instructors, enabling them to conduct all educational and training programs independently in Ukraine. So by working with empowering these trainers, we are ensuring that the educational initiatives are sustainable but also effective in the long run. Furthermore, we also organize physical and online workshops on investigative interviewing and on topics like how to interview children and other vulnerable individuals, evaluation methods, errors of justice, and also more topics. I will not go over all of our previous activities and progresses, but I will highlight some important steps made this year to give you some sort of understanding of the work we are doing together with JustGroup. So, for example, the UN Manual on Investigative Interviewing for Criminal Investigations has been translated and also made available in Ukraine. This manual is maybe the most central document for law enforcement learning how to conduct investigative interviews. The same is also the case for the UNODC e-learning on investigative interviewing, which has also been made available in Ukrainian. Then I also want to highlight the significant progress Ukraine has made in protecting children in criminal investigations. So earlier this year, a group of children interviewers visited Norway. And during their stay, they visited one of our children's houses, the police academy, and also engaged with experts in the field. One of the aims of the visit was to strengthen the implementation of the Children's House model, known as the Green Room methodology in Ukraine. This interdisciplinary approach, which is being successfully implemented in Ukraine, ensures a sensitive and also unified way of interviewing children, regardless of their role, be they suspect, witnesses, or victims. Another focus this year has been to improve and develop investigative management skills. As a starting point, we organized a workshop in Vienna for leaders from the Ukraine criminal justice system. The workshop was structured around how to manage people, but also how to manage the investigation. So given the enormous number of cases you are facing, improved investigative management skills are important for more effectively allocating resources, fostering even better teamwork and communication, and also how to navigate challenges and priorities. So the workshop marked the beginning of building a shared approach for investigative management in Ukraine. And then I also wanted to make a final point. As the world watches Ukraine fight Russia's full-scale invasion, implementing effective investigative interviewing methods sends a powerful message about your nation's dedication. It shows that even in wartime, the principle of ethical practice can prevail, and that Ukraine is committed to build a fairer and more humane justice system. As we engage in today's discussion, I encourage you to think about your role in promoting justice and human rights within your communities. Learning how to conduct investigative interviews is much more than just a technical skill. It is also an important responsibility, meaning that each of us has the potential to ensure that human rights are not just abstract concepts, but real outcomes in our work. And here I also want to stress the importance of collaboration. By sharing our knowledge and strategies, we can build a stronger foundation for justice. Together, we can create a legal environment that respects human rights and encourages good practices. One that not only seeks to hold individuals accountable, but also works to build trust and confidence in the system. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you today. I look very much forward to listening to your discussions ahead and also continuing supporting JustGroup in its vital work. Let me now introduce my friend and colleague, Asbjørn Rachlew. As Asbjørn is a highly experienced police officer and a pioneer in promoting the implementation of investigative interviewing in Norway. He has helped to shift the mindset within Norwegian police. And also in many ways, Asbjørn is the reason for our collaboration with JustGroup, as he conducted a lecture on investigative interviewing in Ukraine already back in 2017, when it all started. He has also made significant contributions as one of the key experts that we rely on in this partnership. So without further ado, I think I will give the word to you, Asbjørn.
Well, thank you very much, Katarina, and many thanks to our partner, JustGroup, for providing me with the opportunity to present some thoughts and reflections about the concept of investigative interviewing. For me, it is an honor. But let me first of all emphasize the most important message I can give today. In Norway, we watch the news every day. Today, we woke up watching the news that your president, Mr. Zelensky, and his wife indeed visited our country this morning. Our prime minister promised Zelensky millions, maybe billions, from the Norwegian oil fund, money designated to the people of Ukraine, to you. We know that you are about to face the fourth winter at war against the aggressor, Russia. I wish we could do more, and we will, together with our friends and neighbors in Europe. We are committed to support your defense against Russia. We think of you every day. We stand by you, and I wish you all the strength in the world. So stay strong. Now, turning to today's topic, investigative interviewing. I've been asked to talk about the benefits and our experience with investigative interviewing here in Norway. And I will. But let me first start with the essential historical perspective. You see, like most detectives around the world, I was taught to believe that once I had a suspect, it was my job to get him to confess. Now, 30 years of scientific research has informed us that there is a better way to investigate crime, a better way and a more efficient way to gather accurate and reliable information to solve crimes. The turnaround operation from confession-driven interrogation techniques to research-based and human rights-based investigative interviewing requires a change of mindset. We have to teach our detectives and prosecutors to think differently. We have to provide them with knowledge and methodology that stimulates them to generate alternative hypotheses and actually test them, rather pursuing information confirming their belief of guilt. It is my firm belief, founded in solid theory and over 20 years of experience from Norway, that if we teach our police the concept and philosophy underpinning investigative interviewing, we can actually operationalize fair trial principles and democratic human rights values, including the presumption of innocence. And we can do so in a sustainable, effective way. Now, torture is a blunt and fundamental breach of the presumption of innocence and all human rights. Psychological pressure and manipulation may not be as brutal as physical torture, but these psychological modifications are only different means to achieve the same end, to get the suspect to confess. The mindset of the fact finder, whether it be a detective or prosecutor, is the same, stimulating nothing but the tunnel vision and planting the seeds of torture. If we want to change our police, we have to provide our colleagues with an alternative. If we take away a tool from a practitioner, we need to replace it with a new one, a tool that they find applicable, that they can use in their daily task. And in some countries, that tool is still torture. I know. I am the Norwegian representative to the Council of Europe's Committee for the Prevention of Torture. Together with my colleagues in the committee from the Council of Europe, we enter prisons and police custody centers all across Europe. Torture continues to prevail in some countries in Europe. When I was a young detective in Oslo back in the 1990s, we did not use torture, but we used manipulation, combined with solitary confinement. And following a judicial breakdown on the turning of the century in which we, the Norwegian police, my colleagues, manipulated a young boy to confess to a murder he did not commit, our police had to change its mindset. And by introducing the concept of investigative interviewing, we initiated a shift. We provided our detectives with an interview methodology, a tool that allowed us to think and act like real detectives, like detectives are supposed to gather accurate and reliable information and investigate and eliminate doubt about matters under investigation. Now, 20 years of experience has confirmed to us that what the scientists promised, namely that investigative interviewing is not only a far more stimulating way of working, it is also more effective. By focusing on interpersonal communication skills, upholding human rights and hence the rule of law, and introducing scientifically grounded interview methodology techniques, we get more information from victims, witnesses, and suspects. We are gathered here today because the organizers of this event, they understand that we are addressing questions that reach far beyond the police station. It is of utmost importance that everyone gathered here today understand and agree to two essential premises and the three significant conclusions or realizations, namely that investigative interviewing victims, witnesses, and suspects is the police's most widely used investigative method. Secondly, the information gathered in these interviews constitutes the most central evidence in criminal cases. Consequently, the way that the police and prosecutors conduct their interviews is crucial for, and is a crucial importance for the rule of law, the legal process, and hence also, most importantly, the public's perception and experience of the criminal justice system. So, as I said, 30 years ago, we needed to change in Norway. We needed to acknowledge that we have made several mistakes. It was a painful process of change. But today, by highlighting the mistakes we made, we could not only inform the Norwegian public that we have changed, but we could do so in a way that our citizens could actually believe that the change was for real and not some political speech to please the people in power. In order to ensure that the Norwegian public, our citizens, that the change was for real, we realized that we, in addition to simply state that we had changed, we also needed to inform and be open about why we had decided to change. We admitted our mistakes and explained how we had failed, why we had failed, and we did so in public. This is why we call the paradigm shift the painful process of change. But today we can look towards the audience, the public, and we can say why we changed. We can document when we changed, and we can say from what and to what. We are now having interview methodology that can stand the test of daily lights, that we can describe and that we can document in video recording and audio recording of our work. Now, I will now wish you all the best in your discussions, and I know that already in the first panel, a friend of mine and long-standing colleague, Yurii, you are ready to take over the discussion. And please, let me just thank you again. And Katarina may not have mentioned it, but there are some thoughts and some ideas and some plans that we indeed are bound for Kiev next year. And I was the first man to raise my hand and say, I will be back. And Yurii, if I am, you will take me to some of your places there also in the evening. I'm truly looking forward to meet you up in person. And good luck with this upcoming seminar on a very important topic that go beyond the police station. We're talking about human rights and the trust in the society. And as Katarina said, society, the direct opposite of the aggressor who is just trying to impose the opposite on you. So stay strong, my friends, and good luck with your upcoming Just Talk. Thank you.
Just Talk.
І сформували певне таке
So actually, this was the backdrop for our today's discussion, and I have two thoughts now. We often say that within our organization, that within our community, during different activities that we have, that changes start with each individual person. And it seems to me that Asbjørn is an example of a person who has done a lot of fundamental work to effect fundamental change in his country. And he was actually the first expert who spoke about investigative interview here in Kyiv back in 2017. And the second thing, we are often asked, why investigative interview? Why is this a topic you're focused on? We are saying it's not about methodology. It's not just a tool. It's about the shift of mindset. It's about the shift in your system of values. So I'm using the English word mindset. The mindset of our law enforcement officers and prosecutors. So we are not using this as a tool. We are more thinking about changing the mindset, the way we think. We are trying to eliminate the tunnel vision. We are trying to look into several hypotheses. We are not trying to be captives of our own biases. And this is long work because we are all adults, and it's much easier for us to learn a skill than to change a mindset that we've had for a while. And today we are also having people who are not just theoreticians of investigative interview. Number one, they are practitioners themselves. And number two, for many years now, they have been putting in a lot of effort to make this change happen. So no single organization is able to raise these fundamental issues for such a global change to take place. It can only happen in collaboration together with the community of investigators and prosecutors who are the key actors who are using investigative interviews. And maybe lawyers will one day use this tool. Let's talk about the applicability of investigative interview for lawyers. And what is also valuable is that these people are present in the room today. So let us start our today's conversation with Yurii. Asbjørn already mentioned Yurii, and Yurii was among those people who were the first ones who was part of the expert group that started studying investigative interview, and these people got together and started thinking about effecting some change in Ukraine. They were thinking about the starting point for this change in Ukraine and in our institutions. So looking back on the year 2017 and starting from 2022, how do you feel? What are some of the lessons that we have learned? What are some of the things that we could have skipped and not have them as lessons learned? And how can institutions move forward so that we can better use this standard in the practical work of Ukrainian investigators and prosecutors?
So I would like to express my gratitude to you for the invitation. Sorry, the mic doesn't work. Okay, I'll have to try again. So good evening, dear colleagues, dear participants. My special thanks to go to our Norwegian colleagues, Asbjørn and Katarina. Asbjørn was the person whom I met at the first meeting, was where people got together from the whole world to learn how investigative interviews should be promoted. And Asbjørn was exactly the person who knows how to make people enthusiastic, and he was the general of the Norwegian police back then, and he was so much enthusiastic in his speech about this that I got back to Ukraine with this urgent willingness and wish to introduce this methodology in Ukraine. This was in 2017 and 2018, but I'm really grateful to all the people who are systemically promoting changes, in particular changes in the field of investigative interview. I'm really grateful to all the colleagues of ours who have something to do with this process. And I think that the main conclusion is that changes never happen overnight. I will not give you the name of the office that was promoting quick reforms, but quick reforms never work, quick decisions never work in the system of criminal justice, because quick decisions never change the behavior and the mindset. So quite often we think that it's enough to have one training, one event, and the people change their mindset and everything changes. But that's the wrong approach. We need to have a long-lasting procedure of supporting people to really have their mindsets change. And there are a lot of people who lose this track because they are eager to get changes, but they want to have those changes within a very short period of time, and soon they just get disappointed about the results. And that's why if we're talking about Ukraine and about the 10 or 9 years of the promotion of this idea, so on the one hand, 10 years are quite a lot, but we are just at the beginning. And definitely there are a number of achievements and there are a number of people dealing with this reform, which is already great. I'm sorry, there are some external noises in Zoom. People have unmuted themselves and speaking about something in Ukrainian. So in Ukraine, we already have the terms that are clear. Investigatory interview is already a trend for people, for professionals. For me, it's a certain quality standard. And, you know, like in technical professions, they have those ISOs, these are certificates of standards of quality. In the law enforcement system, we don't have such standards, but it seems to me that investigative interview and the fact that a person is already applying the practice of investigative interview is a quality sign, the standard of quality. From the point of view of challenges, I need to mention that, first of all, we'll need to teach our lawyers not to think in categories that are always clearly defined in legislation. Let me explain what I mean. Our life is not limited to legislation alone. Legislation has its own field of application, and to introduce changes, it's not necessary to right away have everything prescribed in legislation. It is a challenge. We need to change the mindset, and maybe after that legislation will change. Sometimes lawyers think that nothing can be enacted if it's not in the legislation, but you can see that we functioned within and we operated within the currently available legislation, and we introduced this investigative interview without violating this legislation because we were so eager to reach those changes. And for a period of time, it was not possible for investigators to actually use the evidence collected during the pre-trial investigation in court. A lot of investigators grew up in this paradigm when the interrogation was just a formal action that had to be conducted, but nobody would ever use this evidence. That's why now we are changing the overall situation. And it seems to me that now we have a perfect situation and a perfect context to really launch the investigative interviewing reform for our experts to really use this methodology in a full-fledged basis, for them not to perceive this as a Western methodology that would never work in Ukraine. I think that we are done with this stage, and there are other people who can already share the experience of this fully functioning methodology used in Ukraine. And it seems to me that now Ukraine is at the stage of scaling. So as for me, this is the top achievement when other law enforcement agencies are joining in the process, when we have specific institutions, specific units, department services initiating the process of their joining this methodology, applying it. So this is a period that lasted for 9 years, but now we are of scaling up. Thank you, Yurii, and you have mentioned the trajectory or pathway. We have kind of visualized that path. Victoria, I would ask you to share the screen with this slide. And what resonates quite well with me is that there are some things that can be changed very quickly. But there are certain things that cannot be changed quickly. And we need to understand that we are not just fulfilling a work plan and putting some ticks against some activities. No, we have to have in mind the people that we are working for and the values that we are striving for. And in that way, we are building our implementation plans in a different way. Sorry again, somebody is talking in parallel. Sorry, there is some echo and there is someone talking in parallel. So actually we do have some materials in English. In Ukrainian we have the Mendes principles, which have already been implemented in several policy documents in the Ukrainian context, and this has well become the basis for the development of the methodology of investigative interview, and these materials are also available in Ukrainian. Once we did a study into the practice of interrogations conducted by the national police bodies. This was in 2020. It was a highly representative survey with a good sampling, and we also described the standards of the investigative interview to understand how it could be applied in the Ukrainian context. And the document mentioned by Katarina is the official Ukrainian translation of the ODC methodology. So at least these two documents are already available. And please help me with changing the slide. So just a couple of words about this bridge that we are building to Volodymyr Vasylchuk, the senior investigative detective of the Department of Strategic Development of National Anti-Corruption Bureau, who is also a member of our national expert and coaching team. Volodymyr has really spent a lot of time in the training room, and he used to work a lot with Ukrainian investigators and prosecutors. And, you know, there is a certain approach towards our development of certain programs. At first, in 2022, we were just designing the initial, the basic training program, but now we are working with advanced material, like how to work with vulnerability, and probably we will also go over to specific recommendations regarding how to conduct investigative interviews with children. So, Volodymyr, you were engaged in the process of program designing, and what are the lessons that you have learned as a practitioner that you would probably like to share with us? Thank you, Vasylyna. In fact, investigative interviewing came in 2019 into my life. Maybe it was not the beginning of the whole pathway, because you showed the timeline, but I remember that we had a training for detectives and I was going to Kyiv, so I already had quite a good experience of working in NABU, in the prosecutor's office. But I like this methodology due to the fact that it's a very effective approach from the point of view of getting information and evidence. And it's something that changes the course of the investigation. And you have just recalled the Mendes principles. One of them is about training, it's about education. And, you know, sometimes we tend to forget that interrogation is actually an interview. Interview is all about communication. So what don't we know here? We are used to communicating with people on a daily basis. Somebody learns how to do it from movies, somebody gets his personal experience while coming to a workplace for the first time, but this is not a systemic approach. And in the survey of the year 2019, it was actually analyzed and shown that, in fact, in higher educational institutions, no due attention was paid, at least was paid, to investigative interview, to interrogations, as we used to call it. That was discovered within several academic hours. And that's why every investigator had just a fragmentary idea of what an interrogation was. And he got some more information just based on his empirical experience. That's how it happened with me. And then you either accept the circumstances available in the system or you don't. It was not that easy to add anything new. But if we are talking about a systemic approach, we need to understand that it's not enough to spend 3 hours on teaching a person how to conduct an interview. We have an onboarding training for our detectives for 2 weeks, and only 3 hours are spent on the investigative interview. And then definitely we need to have a basic training, and we should focus on lifelong learning. In our groups, we tried to arrange the training for 3 days, which was also a challenge on the people who went to that training. Could really comment that this was an intensive training program. It was a kind of a self-growth program, and if we compare it with the experience of the UK, the country where this investigative interviewing methodology actually started, so actually it was meant to give people some basic skills, and then people after that basic training could also apply for advanced training, like with vulnerability, working with vulnerabilities, war crimes, and not all people do apply, and not all people are accepted to those trainings because those skills are for more advanced levels. So, of course, at those advanced trainings, this is not just enough to have several hours, like for basic training. And such development programs should really contain a practical element, not just a lecture where somebody is sharing some information. Some skills should be practiced, should be polished there. Because it's not just learning per se. That is learning that should aim at the development of specific competences of a detective, prosecutor, investigator who has attended the training. Unfortunately, we do have this experience when normally you send to a training the people who are bad at their work, who don't have anything special to do, and they're just sent to take a training, which is the wrong approach. It's not about systemic experience. It is not about institutional development. It's not about development and growing at all, because institutional development and consistent development should start with identifying the competences the employees of a specific body need. If we speak about an investigative interview, these are definitely the competences related to getting psychological rapport with the person, and then we need to work with those competences. Suppose someone needs the basic program, we send this person to the basic program on investigative interviewing. If you work as a juvenile prosecutor or a juvenile investigator, then you probably need a vulnerability program about. So we're trying to apply a systemic approach in this respect, but we need allies. We need allies at the level of the heads of institutions, investigative bodies who should really feel the value of having those trainings for their employees. And this value is actually a two-dimensional one. The first dimension is the change of the mindset and the change in the approach to the investigation, because for me, investigative interview is first of all about the detective's mindset. You go out of the box, you go beyond this basic assumption when there is a suspect and everything seems to be clear. You need to get more information. Definitely, if your goal is to apply some manipulations during the interview or just to have many hours of the interview to get some inaccuracies in the evidence, and then there will be psychological expertise. So it's all about manipulation. It's not about extension of the number of investigative versions and about promotion of the process of investigation. If we want to have more information, this methodology allows us to do this. But the trick is that it is a structured approach, and a lot of people who start getting acquainted with the methodology will find at some point in time that, well, I did try to do this, but we do this mostly subconsciously. This is something that we get by trial and error. And here we have specific principles, specific tools which you need to polish and use it in your work. And besides the practical element, this training should also have an element of feedback and self-assessment, which is sometimes also a challenge because a person needs to not just be criticized, but a person needs to be given an area for self-development and growth. We always find it difficult to watch our own videos, our own interviews, but we need to do this to see whether we are developing or not. And this is a part of the learning process. This is also important. And the second element, besides changing an approach and changing a mindset of an investigative officer, so the second element is the element of working with suspects and people coming to the interviews. We show them that we are the investigative office of the new generation, and we do not necessarily want to bring this person to account, whatever it is. We focus on evidence collection. We do this on a high-quality basis, in a professional way, based on a human-centered approach. But again, the methodology presupposes working with different people, different individuals with different indications, and suppose a person comes and lies to us, in spite of the fact that we mentioned the notion and the term interview, and sometimes it's deceitful. It shows that it's like you just talk and you leave. No, this investigative interview methodology creates an opportunity for us to apply systemic thinking and to apply certain tools and techniques that will help us get the truth from the person. And even if this person has to confess to the burden of the evidence that we have collected, or even if we bring a person to account, anyway, this person will feel that we were professional in our approaches, and the level of trust in law enforcement agencies will be much higher. And definitely we will have fewer people who will be brought to account for no valid reason. We will bring to account more people who are really guilty. And this is a problem we need to work on at the highest level possible. And, well, seemingly we're talking about just one methodology in development of certain skills, but we can see that this is also related to the high performance in the investigations and the results of investigations and perception of the law enforcement agencies. Thank you, Volodymyr. And those who regularly attend JustTalk, so you probably think that I've forgotten about the Q&A session. I've not forgotten, but just we decided to have this full picture covered, and you can be getting ready with questions, comments, and reflections in the meantime. So I think that after Ivan, we'll be able to have some communication. So to follow up with what Volodymyr said, I would need to mention one thing related to thinking. We, as lawyers at universities, are normally taught to learn the laws by heart, but we are not that much taught to provide our reasoning and arguments. And this came as an important milestone in the development of investigative interview. It was launched actually, it's still going on. We have started going to universities because it seems to us that for lawyers, no matter whether they become prosecutors, investigative officers, judges, lawyers, attorneys, defense counsels, they need to have this approach to investigative interview, and we need to have this basic approach based on systemic thinking. And it would really be good if this mindset was set with people at the level of universities, and then investigative bodies and law enforcement agencies could just add up more complicated, more complex elements of work to that. And now let me give the floor to Yuliia Usenko, the head of the Department of Protection of Interests of Children and Contracting Domestic Violence of the Office of the Prosecutor General. So Yuliia, I know that for many years I have been working with criminal proceedings with children, and you keep discussing different problems with experts. And, you know, we quite often hear that an interview with a child is the top mastery level. And that is why we have actually started working with this vulnerability component to give a chance for prosecutors and investigators and judges to understand how you can really feel that a person is in vulnerable condition, how you could tailor the toolkit. When in the Ukrainian context, suppose you understand that vulnerability is not about categories determined by the law, but that is the condition each of us may get into at a certain point in time and in certain context. So, Yuliia, what is the prospect of this vulnerability context, and where is the value of an investigative interview in this respect? Well, thank you, Vasylyna, for the invitation. Thank you for giving an opportunity to me to speak about those important categories. Because if we speak about an investigative interview as about a process of communicating with a person, so it's one thing if me and you just try to simulate an investigative interview, and it's quite a different situation when we have a child in front of us. So let's try to dive deep into the things that I would like to share with you. And let me speak about our experience and the possibility of using investigative interview methodology to children. Probably you can recall any situation from your life when you met some of your relatives or friends with small kids, and you always want to ask this person something like, where do you study, what your name is, what does the child do at that time if the child doesn't know you. Either gives brief answers or doesn't answer or shows some shyness or hides away. So this shows that the person, the child, actually doesn't trust you. It doesn't feel safe. And he or she will not actually communicate with you and will not answer your question, which you're trying to ask. Well, seemingly it's okay. It's a situation from your life, but in fact, a child gets distressed as a result of that. And the same holds true for criminal proceedings. If we want to get some information from a child, regardless of whether it is a victim, a witness, or a suspect in criminal proceedings, we put a child in stress. I'm sorry, again, there is a problem either with the internet connection or there are some extra sounds here. So let me get back to the year 2020, when we were generally trying to analyze what is happening to the interrogation, because the legislation has some peculiarities, and there are very many participants that are supposed to be engaged in that process, like psychologists, doctors, legal representatives of the child, and there must be probably defense counsel also present in that process. So in 2020, when we analyzed the overall situation, we got a lot of findings, and we saw that mainly in the printed protocols of interrogations, we did see bad legal language, structured not in the right way. So it was not plain language. But then when I saw the age of the interviewee, I understood that actually this person, this child, could not even pronounce the words used in the protocol. But there was a psychologist, in some cases there was a pedagogue, a teacher, legal representative present there. But they were just performing the roles of presentees, not to avoid the compliance with the procedure. And there comes another issue of the video recording of this process. So again, it's like working in the desert. Though back then, there were already some scientific, even practical developments and methodologies like the ones of Green Room. We know that this process was launched in 2013 or a little bit later, but we were not using this methodology. We had some green rooms, but the rooms that we could see back then didn't work properly because we communicated with the people who actually secured the interview with the child. So we saw that the green room was just about green walls. In the best case possible, there was also a video camera recording the process of communication with the child, and that's it. There was nothing green, nothing else green about that room. And then we started thinking it over. We counted the approximate number of experts working in the field, and primarily these were investigative officers because they mainly communicate during criminal proceedings. We used to have 500 juvenile prosecutors who could be related to those proceedings and who could go to court to interview children, and we had several times more investigative officers. But we just understood that no changes are quick, but it's impossible to teach all of them what child psychology is about. And that's why we decided to use the services of child psychologists who already do have this basic knowledge of the child psychology and who knows how to speak to a child and how we can use plain language while talking with the child. And then we started researching the Barnahus methodologies and practice that they have in other countries, and it was decided that it's really a very good methodology because it works in the best interest of the child, and it does not lead to further traumatization of the child in the course of the investigation. Because in fact, sometimes we do have objectively the situations when the child is not so much traumatized as a result of the event, but is greatly traumatized during what we do with the child. Like sometimes we have more than 10 investigative actions with the child during the criminal proceedings, and then this all gets repeated in court premises. So it's something very bad. Therefore, we got another idea because we said that, okay, we cannot engage all the psychologists. We cannot just make it a duty for the investigative officers to look for child psychologists. This would be the wrong approach. Then we got together with the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the Ministry of Justice, and we decided that we need to create a register of psychologists that will include the people who are ready to work, because there are some psychologists who will never work with sexual violence against children because they are afraid of having their own therapy courses after that, which is a normal thing. In all practice, we understand that all people may be vulnerable, in particular if we speak about this vulnerable category of criminal proceedings as children. So we created this register, and it's really true that at the beginning we tried the way it works, and it really works very well, because a psychology becomes a kind of an investigator, an interpreter between the investigative officer, the prosecutor, and the child. And sometimes the child who has become victim or survivor of domestic violence has gone through absolutely tragic things and awful things, and the child doesn't even understand what was happening to him or her, and describes certain actions as again, because that was how the perpetrator actually described it to him. The psychologist can identify it, but we cannot identify it because we need it for the protocol. We need evidence.
So we are talking about a psychologist being an intermediary and covering two needs. Number one, it's our need to get quality evidence, and number two is not to traumatize the child, to stop the interview at the right time, to recommend therapy for the relatives that are present there together with the child. So indeed, this is very important. What is even better is when you have a technical opportunity to have the interview outside of the view of the legal representatives, lawyers, prosecutors, investigators, or investigating judge, somebody that we have in Ukraine. So, and if an investigating judge wants to interview a child, they can use the interview, the results of the interview in court, and it's not then repeated. So we are documenting the interview, and we have this wonderful balance between the best interests of the child and the interests of justice. This is the goal of investigative interview with vulnerable groups and children. Just as Vasylyna mentioned at the beginning, we need to understand who we are working for. We are not working for ourselves just to prove that the perpetrator has been held to account, that we have a guilty verdict, but we are working to protect those who approach us. And it's indeed valuable when investigators, prosecutors, and judges understand this, that we are working in the best interest of vulnerable groups, including children. And it's important that we understand why we are doing what we are doing. And at the core are the best interests of a child in this particular case. And I can use specific arguments. 85%, not 100%. We understand that the transformation has not been perfect, but 85% of children that are part of the proceedings, that go through investigative measures, they receive the psychological support, and this is an approach that does not traumatize them during the interview. And if we are talking about the general number of children, here we are talking about capacities of particular communities, capacities of particular police departments where they may have green rooms. But if we are talking about children that have various procedural statuses, they go through interviews at the green rooms, and 12% of children go through interviews at barnahuses, and it's easy to explain because we have only 13 barnahuses across the entire territory of Ukraine. That's why we have this low number. So what has this transformation resulted in? We were able to revive the approach towards investigation of specific cases involving children. We are talking about sexual violence. When there are no traces, we are talking also about sexual violence not involving penetration, when we only have the testimony of a child, or we may have third-party testimony. It may be the mother or another relative or somebody that the child trusted enough to share their story. And over the past years, we were able to actually have such cases reach the court. Of course, we do not use all of the evidence, and there is always a risk of somebody changing the testimony if we assume that the child will be interviewed. There is also a risk of the perpetrating not being held to account. But in the majority of cases, we do get verdicts. We do get verdicts with punishment. And for us, it's the best result because we have been able to overcome the stigma when we do not trust the person. And if we do not trust the person, what kind of quality evidence can we talk about when we start communicating with the child, for example? So the key elements that we are working on are specially equipped rooms where we are working with the child. It may be a regular office, but not with a standard arrangement of tables, but it has to be something that will make the child feel safe. We're also working with professional psychologists who understand child psychology, who are actively involved in the process, helping both the investigator and the child. And we also pay attention to the legal representative. This is somebody that a child is not afraid of. They are not afraid of being part of our procedures. And the child must also trust the person who is leading them through the criminal processes. In many cases, a child may want for their mother and father to be present, but they don't want to give the testimony because they feel ashamed. And we have this tool in our criminal legislation. We can replace the legal representative here. And of course, we try to ensure psychological support by involving civil society organizations and psychologists working within the community, because we sometimes happen to re-traumatize the child because they have to relive those memories. And when the child goes back to the community, they should be able to get the psychological support. And the final important element is video documenting. So this is for us not to traumatize the child in the process of documented evidence once and then move to the court stage. So that was briefly about our experience. In case you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them. I didn't mean that the experience was brief. I meant that my story about our experience was brief. Thank you, Yuliia, for everything that you're doing. Yes, it was a brief story about a vast experience and the efforts of a number of people. That's really invaluable. And with this, I'd like to give the floor to a practitioner, Ivan Dulkai, representing the Chief Investigation Department of the National Police of Ukraine. And together with his colleagues, they were actually the first ones to use the investigative interview approach in practice, together with his colleagues in Bucha. And Ivan, we are very eager to hear from your experience. Why is it important for you as an investigator, you as a team of investigators that are working with cases that are very important for our country? And if you could offer this helicopter view, why is it important for the institution itself? Thank you very much for the invitation. It's indeed a very important event. It's an event that will help us make the approach towards investigative interview even more relevant. So it's about a philosophical shift in mindset. And while listening to Yuliia, who was talking about conducting investigative interviews with children, I remembered my own experience. And at the very beginning, I would like to actually bring you along the path that our team has walked. And it all started with our realization that the crimes, the war crimes that we are investigating, foresee specific peculiarities. There is limited evidence that we can use. And in this case, work with testimony is extremely valuable because interrogations of victims and witnesses of war crimes require not just special preparation, but it's also about your communication skills, emotional stability. And clearly, another important element is establishing the rapport between the investigator and the person that we are interviewing. So all of that resulted in us focusing on increased quality of interviews. And thanks to JustGroup, we started learning more about this methodology. It would have been impossible without quality and managerial trust of our management. Without this institutional support, it's impossible to have quality reforms. At the same time, we started one of the most important investigations for us. That was the investigation of war crimes committed in Bucha. And for that, we set up a special investigative and operative team. And the key task for me during the first stage in the work of that group was to create a set of requirements for them to have all the interviews video documented. And that requirement alone helped us understand the actual level of the quality of interviews conducted by investigators coming from different regions of Ukraine. So we were able to identify the gaps and to understand what the starting point in that training was supposed to be. So once again, all members of the team completed a training that I've just referred to. It was a training conducted in 2024. I think it was June, if I'm not mistaken. So after that, all the members of the team, both the investigators and the operative officers, that was extremely important for us, they all came to this shared realization of how the methodology looked like in practice. Because as I mentioned, investigative interview is not just a technique, it's a philosophy of your interaction with another individual. And it was important for us, for all those working with people, starting from the moment this communication starts. It's not about the time when you are entering the office, when you are looking, it's about you looking for those witnesses. So during that stage, you are also talking to people.
Recording in progress.
Якості і ефективності проведення слідчої роботи. І коли ми здійснювали цю оцінку, ми зразу поставали перед питанням, а що можна вважати успішним допитом? Успішний допит – це коли ми отримали інформацію, яку ми хотіли.
Successful interview is one that yields some information, or is it about the way in which we got that information? Or maybe it's an opportunity to use this interview as evidence in court. Or perhaps this is about preventing re-traumatization of a person during the investigative procedures, or maybe the person will feel better after such an interview. And we couldn't pick just one answer to this question because, as mentioned already, the actual value of an interview is about upholding the balance between all of the components I've just mentioned. And when we have this balance, we can say that we have achieved the goal that we have set for ourselves at the beginning. And then we move to the next stage. What does the investigative interview have influence on? Does it have an influence on the investigation alone? What are some of the other things it can influence? During the time of our work, we have seen quality changes in the attitude of people towards our work, in their perception of our work. And I have this example that deals with one of the interviews that I conducted in late 2023. So at the end of the interview, I tried to do what Volodymyr was talking about. I wanted for the person to feel as if they have been treated fairly. And of course, it's also about establishing the rapport and opening the door for future interactions. So I remembered about that interview for some time, and after that I conducted dozens or maybe even hundreds of similar interviews. And then in a year and a half, that witness called me, and he was very emotional over the phone. They said they were very happy to be able to give me a phone call, and they told me that he came across important information that could be helpful in our investigation. So he shared a contact of another witness that he spoke to after a year and a half. And he remembered that he had this wonderful communication with me during our interview, and he considered it important for himself to call me and to share the information about that new person. And indeed, that new witness helped us, and we were able to actually investigate another crime. Luckily, we have many examples like this, many positive examples like this, and the investigative interview foresees this human-centric approach. And in our case, we are working with people who have survived traumatic events, occupation, and war crimes. So in our case, we are combining this approach with trauma-informed approach. And it all changes the perception of the society, the perception of the work of the police in one particular place, where we are having this permanent team that is using this methodology. We are always saying there is no perfect investigative interview. It would have been a lie if I told you that after a 3-day training or after an additional training program, we came out as perfect interviewers. Yes, of course, it all happened step by step. We first put one technique to practice, and it was a thing that one team member used, and they started excelling at. And then in the future, through constant work, during interviews, we saw that team members became more confident in what they were doing. They were not nervous or worried that they were about to face a difficult witness. It's been 3 years since the events that we are asking them about have taken place. So we actually need to go back in time. We are trying to get the information that we need for our case. And this is a difficult process which requires professional understanding of the tool that you will be using to dig this information up. And we are saying that this confidence helps us be more efficient in our work, helps us achieve the goals that we have set for ourselves. So I think that this is a quality measure for any process. In summary, I want to say that investigative interview for us is indeed a tool that has proven its efficiency, and it increases our chances of achieving those goals that we identify for ourselves within our investigation. And I'd like to look at the reasons why it became possible. I'm of course not Mr. Mendes, who was actually to formulate some measures that are necessary for the global implementation of this methodology. I will be talking about those things that worked for our team in particular. And the first and most important thing is the support from the management of the head investigative department, because that was the thing that helped us spend the time, spend the resources, it helped us involve all the right people to take it off the ground. Of course, it wouldn't have been possible without the driving force that JustGroup is. For years now, they have been implementing quality changes in criminal justice. They have been helping with the introduction of investigative interview. But there are some practical components, such as stability of the team. It's something that you cannot replace with other things. If you have different team members coming and going, if you don't have people who go through similar shared experiences, you cannot ensure efficient and quality professional growth of the entire team. And clearly, it's all about constant practice. You constantly need to conduct these interviews. Without this practice, I think we wouldn't have been able to reach a point in which we are right now. And coming back to the managerial will, I can say that this team is limited in its objectives. We are limited to communication with victims and witnesses. We are actually targeting our activities towards that. So documenting of some things, sending petitions or indictments to court, this is not something that this team does. It's actually the duty of a different part of the team. And to summarize, I want to mention that this approach changes the mindset of an investigator. When we have the trust from the public, when we have quality communication, when we feel this emotional connection with the person that we are talking to, it's not in something extra. It's the foundation of your work. And if we're able to scale up this example and use this approach while investigating other types of crimes, it will result in changes in the entire criminal justice. Thank you, Ivan. It's always valuable to hear stories from field when practitioners share their experience, and I'm sure that we already have some comments, questions and reflections which we will eagerly listen to. So we were talking a lot about individual experience or the experience of individual units and institutions. We believe that this is a valuable experience. These are so-called islands of innovation or growth. It's a lab-like environment in which you can grow new approaches. But if we are talking about systemic change, first of all, it's about the level of standards and policies. And sometimes you shouldn't only be focusing on gaps only. You should also be focusing on your achievements. I think it is important. The methodology of investigative interview is now part of the national strategy of children's rights protection. So we have come up with a selection of policies that already mention the Mendes principles or the investigative interview itself. So it's a strategy for countering torture, which also has the principles of Mendes' principles at the core. So I think all of this gives an extra push to the institutions to move in the right direction. So we are now eager to hear from you. So what kind of experience do you have with this topic? Are you researching this topic, or maybe you have heard about it through interaction with investigators or prosecutors, or perhaps you know about it because you're a manager? So any questions, reflections, or comments are welcome. Good evening, everyone. Yes, good evening to fans of criminal justice. I'm Vyacheslav, I'm a lawyer, and I have a reflection, not a question. I want to support Yurii by saying that we do not necessarily need to have investigative interview enshrined in our criminal procedure code before we can actually implement it in practice. So if we are talking about criminal liability for some types of crimes, people were often saying that if something is not mentioned in the criminal code, then it doesn't exist. So if we are working, for example, with piracy, this is not something that we have in the criminal code of Ukraine. And sometimes lawyers talk to victims and witnesses, but once again, this is not something that we have in our criminal procedure code. What I wanted to say is that lawyers should also be trained in some basics of investigative interview. And there is a challenge that we have for this institution. The institution of interrogation also has a challenge. When a suspect does not want to testify against themselves, so they are not confirming the hypothesis that the law enforcement pre-trial investigation bodies have formed, it's all fiction. So we are now talking about interrogation of a suspect when we have enough evidence to consider the person involved in committing a crime. So this person is then interrogated by the procedural manager. And when they are later invited to the interrogation, it doesn't really matter what they're going to say because the hypothesis will not change. In many cases, after the interrogation of the suspect, the pretrial investigation may even acknowledge their mistakes. And sometimes we should also talk about the principles of such interrogations being very direct. And the third thing is that the suspect is not required to tell the truth. So all of this contributes to the challenges that the Institute of Investigative Interview may face. I support the development of this institute. I believe it is aimed at better protection of rights, including the rights of the suspects. But I'm also opposed to the concept of tunnel vision or the so-called confirmation bias. These are negative things, and I'm convinced that the investigative interview at its core is aimed at either eradicating these phenomena or eliminating them. Yes, thank you for developing the Institute of Investigative Interview in Ukraine. So let's hear some reflections, and if you have questions, you can also share them. Do you have any comments? Do you have any questions? I'm sure that we had one more comment. It was rather a question. I think it's adjacent to the topic of investigative interview. So what is the correlation with the stick system that we still have in practice, and do we have actual pressure on the prosecutor within the system to reach the indictment stage? So let's focus on some practical things here. So do we have any correlations with the stick system? It so happened that other than studying at NABU, I also administer the assessment system, and I often hear this definition of a stick system, and here it's not about the number of sticks, not about the number of cases that have reached the court. We are talking about restoring trust. It's not about the quantity, it's about the quality. And if you keep quality in mind while developing the investigation plan, while conducting some investigative measures, then an investigative interview will definitely be helpful for us, because we will be focused on getting more information in advancing in our investigation and holding to account the actual perpetrators. But if we don't have enough evidence, then we can acknowledge that we are lacking, that maybe we didn't work well enough. So we need to say that we are moving towards the direction when somebody may be taken into custody and then released, or it may be that somebody is served a notice on suspicion and again then released. So it often happens that if you find yourself within the system of criminal justice, you cannot leave it. So maybe it's not going to be a guilty verdict and you'll be lucky, but you will still be in the system. So yes, we have the notice on suspicion, then we have the indictment in court, but you may answer this question or maybe share similar experiences. So imagine that a person is acquitted. Have you ever had a situation in which where in case of equality interview and the prosecutor being unbiased, it would result in closing the criminal proceedings? So for some reason there was no trust. So the lawyer did not work with the client, did not tell them that they should give the testimony. Why? Because we have such a system of criminal justice, because a person doesn't really believe that the testimony can change anything. So we just follow Article 63. And if we are talking about lack of bias, about trying to really identify what kind of events took place, the testimony can change things, but all on condition that there is trust. So we are talking about trust in criminal justice bodies. And if we are to define what interrogation is, so when we call a person
Recording in progress.
Так само мені відгукнулося. З приводу того, що повідомила пані Юлія, я так само був закріплений за лінією розслідування злочинів, вчинених проти неповнолітніх і неповнолітніми, там, малолітніми. Так само мав спілкування з дітьми, допитував дітей. І хочу зазначити, що дійсно це досить серйозна категорія осіб, так, до яких треба дійсно особливий підхід. Направду сказати, щоб хтось, це був 16-17 рік, вчив, ніхто не вчив. Це було, так само, як сказав пан Іван, це було якісь книжки, фільми і досвід старших колег, яких, знову ж таки, на той час було дуже мало. Потім з приводу підходу процесуального інтерв'ю, так? Як тільки я починав свою професійну діяльність на посаді слідчого, певно, що це ще була практика, так? Тоді це був Печерське районне управління поліції в місті Києві і керівник відділу розслідування злочинів загальнокримінальної спрямованості. сказав на першій нашій зустрічі дуже мудру фразу мені, як починаючому слідчому. Ти повинен відноситися до людини, яка сидить напроти тебе, як до людини, в першу чергу, з великої літери. І чесно, я не зрозумів, що він мав на увазі. Потім в процесі діяльності, в процесі нашої комунікації і спілкування, я зрозумів, що ту людину треба сприймати так, як би ти хотів, щоб сприймали тебе і відносилися до тебе. І, як би це не звучало, але оці підходи процесуального інтерв'ю, особисто я застосовував. Я не дуже заглиблений в цю тему, я з нею ознайомився фактично перед заходом і періодично читаючи доступні матеріали, але я розумію, що в першу чергу і погоджуюся з озвученими тезами, що не кожен підходить для ролі, для здійснення процесуального інтерв'ю. І тут, як на мене, враховуючи, що нині в мене професійна діяльність пов'язана з багато в чому оцінкою етичних аспектів, моральних аспектів, так? Хоча й в діяльності судді, але я розумію, що процесуальне інтерв'ю – це більше не тільки просто методика, це про набір певних етичних складових людини, яка його проводить. І саме ваші розвиткові програми, я думаю, що це правильний шлях і те, чого потребує не тільки наша система правоохорони, я думаю, що це треба поширювати і так само на практику дисциплінарної відповідальності суддів, тому що ми, як інспектори, ми позбавлені можливості допитувати людей, однак в ході засідання дисциплінарної палати ми можемо ставити питання. Так само питання можуть ставити нам, і я розумію, що, можливо, цей підхід він був цікавий саме і застосовний під час засідання. З приводу... Це була рефлексія. З приводу питання, я б хотів дізнатися реальні кейси, реальні випадки застосування процесуального інтерв'ю.
Real cases of applying investigative interview during the interview in court. What are the prospects of using this technique by lawyers, by defense counsel? Because at the pretrial investigation stage, it's all clear, but what about courts? Judges may ask questions, prosecutor will ask questions, the defense counsel will also have this cross-examination. So do you have any cases for the prosecutors, when the prosecutors, let's say, use the knowledge as the graduates of the program in court? Yes, I will start, but I would ask Ivan, Yuliia, Volodymyr to go on with the comments. So let me start with saying that, first of all, the investigative interview methodology is about a pre-trial stage. We tried to watch the way it works in the UK, in Norway, and there are some elements that can definitely be also used in the court, but the methodology by itself was mainly designed for the pre-trial investigation stage. And I really liked what you said about certain ethical components or competences, whatever we call it. In the UK, all the investigative officers have to get this basic training in investigative interview. This is the basic training, and nobody is discussing whether it's required or not. That's what you said. This is just a standard of the work of the investigative officer. And then they further assess the competences of a person to see whether this person has enough competences to further develop in the field of investigative interviews. Because it may be the case that the person can do some other work better. The person will be better in something else than in communicating with people, because to communicate with people, even in our daily life, we need some special skills. So this will then lead to kind of specialization of majoring of the people who will further work with other people during the investigative interviewing process. But that is my comment, and maybe my colleagues have some other comments to follow up. Yes, I would like to
comment on this question about the successful case, because it really shows that this needs to be done not only by judges, by prosecutors, investigative officers. This should also be done by defense counsels in the cases that we have and where children are engaged. I can tell you we always try to introduce some elements of investigative interviewing. Well, the first rule for us is that we try to avoid the interrogation of a child in court, and we use all possible possibilities for that at the pre-trial in interviewing stage. We even have the practice of the Supreme Court that shows that it's possible to use video evidence in courts to avoid re-traumatization of the child. Then when we go to courts and when we still have to ask child some questions, we use the following tools. First of all, we take care of this taking place from a different room for the child not to see the overall settings and the great number of people. So it's a closed setting, but there's a judge, then there's an assistant judge, it's a secretary and counsel prosecutor. We also have a psychologist present, and sometimes it's difficult because the defense counsel is always trying to somehow not have a psychologist there. We had a case when the child was 11 and this was a witness traumatized by the event, so we secured the presence of the psychologist, but the defense counsel said that it's not okay, and all the more that the psychologist is going to stay in a different premises now, so it's not okay. So actually we had two psychologists, our psychologist and their psychologist, but we ensured that we secured this sense of security and safety to a child. So we had some breaks during the interviews, but anyway, the evidence was taken from the child. Also, when we are getting ready for an interview, it's very important to get ready, to be prepared. In particular, when you work with vulnerable categories of people, because the wording of questions when we face children of different age is important. If it's not an adolescence, you cannot ask a child why, because the child doesn't yet have this logical causality relationship in the mind, and the child will never give the answer to the question why, but or he will do this just to come to be liked by an adult. So it's important to prepare questions. These are the elements of investigative interviews that are used by our prosecutors. And well, it would be a dream for all of us that all the entities engaged at different stages of criminal proceedings to be using investigative interview to act in the interest of the people for whose sake we are conducting those proceedings. Thank you, Yulia. I think that we can take one or two more comments from the room. Let's focus on two very concise statements. I would ask you to squeeze it within 1 minute and a half as possible, because you will still have a chance to voice your ideas in the second part. So with your permission, I'll stay seated, and my question is for Ivan, because he's a practitioner. So do you see elements of tactics? Should there be any elements of tactics employed in the process of investigative interview? All right, let's listen to all the questions, and the speakers will try to sum up their answers. I'm Natalia Mazur. Good evening. I'm also a lawyer, so I'll have a quick reflection. Thanks a lot to all the speakers. You really keep inspiring us, and I would like to follow up with what my colleagues said. We apply investigative interviews not just during the interrogations of our witnesses and victims, but also of our clients, because sometimes they come with a conscious mind, but anyway, you feel the barrier. You feel that they are trying to conceal something, to hide something away, and then that creates some problems in terms of collection of evidence, because we may take the wrong way, and you don't get the full picture. So my question is for Volodymyr. You mentioned a phrase that acted as a trigger for me. So you said that if we apply this tool, then we will have fewer people brought to account who are not guilty. So Do you think that we really have a lot of people who are innocent, not guilty, but we have brought them to account? No. Good evening. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for this highly interesting discussion. I'm Anastasia Panteleva, and I'm the head of the Department of Recording War Crimes in the NGO Media Initiative for Human Rights. And Ivan, I've got a question for you. So I meant to ask you, we know that following the ICC standards, the publicity of the witness may have a negative impact on the quality of the interview. So do you face such a problem? Do you think that publicity really matters, publicity for witness or not? And since we have frequent exchanges now, we can see that these people are immediately attacked by mass media. I mean, prisoners of war. They are invited to shows, they are interrogated, different videos and plots are created with them. So how could we arrange this process for at first an investigator to reach the witness, and then only the media will be able to reach them after that? Yes, and the speakers will have just 3 minutes for the three of you to give comments, and then we will do some networking, and we will follow up this discussion in informal atmosphere. Well, thank you for your questions, and let's start with the first question regarding whether there should be some elements of tactics during the interview. In my practice, there overwhelmingly predominates in the interview of witnesses and victims of war crimes. And when we have interviews like that, we primarily try to get the person back to the place and to the time where this will happen, for the person to really provide comprehensive information about the crime that has been committed. And we use free narration or free recalling technique in most cases for this. But sometimes we conduct the interviews with suspects or the witnesses who could possibly become the suspects, like Russian prisoners of war. Then we also apply the technique of conversation management. I will not dive deep into this technique by itself. Let me just say that it envisages that you are able to really record true-to-life evidence and how you identify the facts when you are deceived or when the person is not telling you the truth. So those techniques, if we take them as tactical elements, have to be used, have to be applied. And now I will give the floor to you, but regarding working with our prisoners of war who are coming back is concerned, again, some problems with the internet in the studio. The process of the reintegration is a very long and tedious process, and the process of working with those people is also a long one, because we need to assess the condition of the person, the degree of vulnerability of the person, and we try to really take all the investigative actions within the period right after they get back from captivity, because right back after captivity they are taken to some hospital where they are provided with some support, and where this process of reintegration, socialization of those people is taking place. And if we see that it's already possible to take any investigative actions with a person, we come there right away. We do get the information regarding who has come back. We assess the overall picture. We assess the information regarding where they went missing and what circumstances, where they could possibly be staying, that they could have information about a certain crime, and in what criminal proceedings we should probably have an interview with them. So we do have this information, we assess this information, and we reserve an opportunity for ourselves to somehow limit the communication of this person with any media man, with any journalists and reporters. But people are free to choose, and that's why we may give some recommendations to them. We may ask them to do something or not to do something, but we cannot prohibit. And if this person wants to go to journalist right away, we cannot do anything about that. We're not allowed to. But I don't have any cases like this, and almost all the people with whom we communicated do understand the importance of this whole process. They are eager to communicate with us. Therefore, we actually are not faced with the problem that has been mentioned by you. I wouldn't say that first journalists communicate with them and then we communicate with them. Regarding the ICC and the evidence for the ICC, well, I think that this is the question that the Office of the Prosecutor General should be asked, because it is the office that coordinates the interaction with representatives of the ICC. Just 1 minute for you, Volodymyr. Yes, let me try to be quick. So the question regarding illegal bringing to account. So it depends on how we approach this issue, because we can do it within the limit of criminal statistics, like we have every suspicion that ended up in the indictment and in a sentence of, if we speak about criminal proceedings, that should be an intended murder or intended crime. But why did I mention this in the context of investigative interviews? In the context of biases and prejudices, because biases and prejudices are something that we all have. But when at the institutional level you have a suspect, and then definitely the suspect will get to prison. So that's what I was talking about. When we form this assumption and we are biased towards the end of the process, of course, then the interrogation is just a formality then, and the investigative office is just trying to avoid some burning questions, awkward, provocative questions, and he is not interrupting with a basic investigative assumption or hypothesis. But if we speak about broadening our picture, and of course that is all the extra effort, and the person may appear to be guilty or non-guilty, but if the investigative officer has just one assumption, one version, then definitely the percentage of the people who will be brought to account illegally will be higher. But if he really tries to identify how it really happened, then there is a higher chance that fewer innocent people will be brought to account. Let me comment upon the issue of publicity of witnesses and the importance for the ICC. And let me try to say why I am trying to answer this question, because we communicate a lot with the ICC, well, I would say that the algorithm is very simple. If a child gives us some testimony during the investigation process, and then there come a number of other interviews that may be conducted in different ways, when the child is willing to get to be liked by the adults, when the testimony changes with time because of the influence of some people who are engaged in that process. So when it comes to the point in time when witnesses are to be allowed access to the ICC, the prosecutors of the ICC will try to assess the relevance of this or that witness, and they will assess all the stages of this evidence, because this is also evidence. This is narration of the facts. And if all the pieces of evidence are different, or if they contain some controversial information, this witness will not be considered to be relevant for the ICC. Moreover, the ICC has also got its own policies of working with vulnerable categories of people, and they follow this rule of avoiding re-traumatization of a person. In particular, we work with people, with children coming back from the occupied territories who have been deported. So quite often we come into contact with our ICC colleagues, and when we have this recording of the interview with the child, so they sometimes use the recordings, but they don't start having another interview with the child or an adult who has come back together with this child. Or sometimes we even have this interview with the child, and we have the representatives of the ICC who also send the questions to a psychologist or to the prosecutor and the investigative officer to kind of cover their needs, to meet their needs for justice and to avoid a repeat interview. That's why we always ask not to have any public speeches. We ask our witnesses not to have any public speeches because otherwise this may further affect the process in the ICC. Thank you for your comments. I'm really happy to finish this part of our discussion with saying that over a short period of time, starting with 2017, we have already launched our discussion of the national practices, which really function in practice, not just in theory. These are the practices for piloting, for approving this methodology of investigative interviewing. It seems to me that there is a lot of energy behind that, and we can feel that great transformations are coming in the system of criminal justice. But we're going to take a break for about 10 or 15 minutes, and we will have just Blitz part, a very quick part. We think that it's important to talk to managers from the system of criminal justice, and we need to discuss together with them what needs to be done to scale it all up. So we'll have a representative of the Office of the Prosecutor General of the Security Service, National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, and within this Blitz format, we will hear their visions of scaling. So let's have a 10-minute break, and at 7:35 we will come back and you will have a chance to ask your questions during the break. So use the chance. Thank you.
Пятый, пятый, пятый. Доброго дня. 4-5 тисяча. Карта. Ні, дякую. Дякую. Я могла б сказати газ по привичці. Я знаю, тому я і так блін думаю. А там написано, типа, бензин?
Для чого воно включено? Дивіться, заказав дизель.
Ага. Ну, понятно.
Я говорю, ну, сейчас вернется, но вже не машині.
З матами, з матами.
Поручицька, де все зняли і заправили.
Так а хрена ли он не проверил? А чого он не перевірив? Ну, я поняла.
Колеги, ми будемо продовжувати. Це,
Dear
як ми
colleagues,
казали, це такий бліц.
let's resume our work. As mentioned, this is a Blitz format. It's going to be a short section, so let's take our seats with your drinks, with the snacks. Please feel comfortable.
Отже, в нас сьогодні, власне, на цій
So
такій бліц...
today, during this Blitz panel with managers, we have Dennis Lysenko, Deputy Head of the Department of War from the Prosecutor General's Office. We have Serhii Kushnir, Head of the Department of Pre-Trial Investigation of the Head Investigative Department of the Security Service of Ukraine, and Uliana Chuchkevych, who is an acting head of the 3rd subunit of detectives of the representing NABU. So Uliana will be joining us online. As mentioned, this is going to be a quick Blitz format because it's important not just to reflect on the experiences of some units, teams, or part of institutions in the context of implementation of investigative interview, because we understand that we want for it to become a standard that is an integral part in the work of investigators and prosecutors. So our question for you is as follows: where are these key lines of effort that you are seeing as managers so that we can institutionalize this practice and for it to become a norm for the detectives of the Security Service of Ukraine, for the investigators? So this is what you could tell us about Serhii. Top three things, top 3 lines of effort. We understand that there may be multiple, but what are some of the most important things here? Thank you for the invitation. So once again, thank you for the invitation to participate in today's event. Thank you for the support in the implementation of investigative interview methodology within the Security Service of Ukraine. I represent a unit that investigates war crimes, the war of aggression. So we were first trying this methodology within the unit that is investigating said types of crimes. And the persons interviewed are specific subjects that we did not interview en masse before the full-scale invasion, before we had the active phase of war. So today we have these 4 main categories of people that we interview. These are prisoners of war, of the occupying forces, we call them the army of orcs. And as of today, together with the representatives of the Prosecutor General's Office, we have interviewed up to 8,000 people. We are also talking about our prisoners of war. More than 7,000 people have been interviewed by our investigators and the representatives of the Prosecutor General's Office, the Department of War. We are also talking about children who have been deported, and I heard that Yuliia was already mentioning the specifics of work with this group of witnesses. And a new category of people that we are interviewing are conflict-related sexual violence victims. Here we are talking not just about civilians, not just about women, but a large percentage of men who are servicemen who became victims of CRSV while in captivity, and they were also victims of other types of violence. When we first started analyzing the interviews of the first year of the full-scale invasion conducted by our investigators and other subjects, what we witnessed was that it was just a list of questions that was being asked. It was like a template. So, what are some of the missions that you participated in? Where were you stationed? What did you see? So the interview lasted between 5 and 20 minutes. So if we analyze the duration of an interview, we can already make a conclusion that it was inefficient. Later on, when we started understanding our mistakes, and if we are talking about the Russians, about their prisoners of war, they are being swapped for our prisoners of war. So we will not have another opportunity to interview them. And for us, it was very important to have efficient interviews with the Russian POWs. Plus, amendments to the Criminal Code of Ukraine gave us an opportunity to use the testimony of witnesses, victims, and suspects documented using a different equipment. So here we are talking about amendments to 2 articles of the Criminal Procedure Code of Ukraine. And as a result, we received more quality evidence. For this very purpose, we set up groups or teams of investigators from the main department as well as investigators from the regional department, not just frontline areas here, but we are also talking about the so-called rear regions that are located further away from the front lines. And the requirement was that the investigators were permanent. So we had a group of investigators interviewing Russian POWs, then there was a separate group interviewing our servicemen, because such interviews are not conducted in a chaotic way. We organize the process in such a way that Russian POWs are interviewed at specific camps. We have 5 camps like that where they are staying. So in analogy with the Russian Federation, they have more than 200 facilities where they're keeping our POWs, and they have recently organized this camp where they are organizing some visits for the representatives of the Red Cross. And we have 5 camps like that. This is part of our penitentiary system. And in collaboration with the penitentiary system, we have organized special areas where we are conducting interviews with Russian POWs. And having analyzed interviews conducted back in 2022, we realized that we needed to have additional interviews. We needed to conduct other investigative measures, and we started looking for our returnees, for our POWs, and it turned out that many of them rejoined the armed forces of Ukraine, and it was difficult to reach them. Some have already been killed at the front line. Some people left for a different country. So it was impossible practically to improve the testimony that we already had. We also establish efficient work with them at rehabilitation facilities. When they are coming back, I heard there was a question about media, so we are trying to limit their communication with third parties. And here we are not talking about, of course, relatives, psychologists, and doctors. After a week of rehabilitation, we have agreed on that with the doctors and psychologists. So this is enough for the first stage. And in addition to individual recommendations where we are being told who requires more time, because socialization and coming back to normal life happens differently for different people. But after a week, we conduct investigative measures, interviews, experiments for forensic, expert assessments together with our institutions, and we already have some results. And in some random cases, within a week, 2 or 3, we still need to contact these people repeatedly. Those groups of investigators that are working with different categories of people have completed a number of training events. The first one was the one organized by JustGroup and partners, and they also undergo other types of training on how to interview victims of CRSV, on how to interview minors. And we try and maintain this kind of work. And some investigators may say that they have already attended a similar training, but we should always make use of new opportunities. It's always useful to hear from somebody else's experiences, and we hear and we see that this is yielding some results. And we are hearing about the proposals to introduce an institute of investigative interview, where interrogation is seen not just as a process of documenting information, but it's also part of planning and assessment. So we put this proposal on the table for our managers, and we told them that it's not just for the investigators that are already working who require this training. So we decided that students, law students, should be taught the basics. So on the basis of the Yaroslav Mudry Law Academy in Kharkiv, starting from the 3rd year of studies, future investigators are already told about the basics of investigative interviews. So when they join the ranks of our investigators, they will be investigating not just war crimes, but these will be crimes against security, such as treason, espionage, and these investigators will treat interrogation not just a process of documenting information, but as a process of obtaining evidence, not just obtaining evidence by using all means available, but using a technique where during the investigation you are a partner with the person that you are talking with, because you are interested in obtaining information and the other party should be interested in sharing this information with you. Also, while interviewing Russian POWs, we faced a problem with different psychological aspects, because you are seeing an enemy sitting in front of you, and everybody knows that people are killed in Ukraine on a daily basis, and Russia has attacked us, and in many families we have either friends, relatives, or close family members that have been killed. So no family has been left unaffected. So we had to complete some psychological training with our investigators. Before entering a room with a Russian POW, they had to go through that training. So when entering the room, they would see not an enemy, but a person that could testify as a witness of a war of aggression, or potentially as a witness or somebody involved in committing of a war crime. So we are continuing this work. This is something that we'll continue doing in the future, and when peace comes to Ukraine, we will be introducing the practice of investigative interview, and we will improve the knowledge of our investigators. Thank you for sharing this experience. Just a short summary of what you've just mentioned. It's valuable that you are assessing your previous interviews, so this is very important. It's not just conducting new interviews, but it's also to integrate assessment and analysis. So you mentioned systemic trends, some specialization of investigators working with particular categories of witnesses, or people with other procedural status. And this week, actually, a training course started at the Institute of the Security Service of Ukraine on the basis of Yaroslav Mudry Academy of Law in Kharkiv. So this is the first course like that. It's really valuable. And this is something that we can build upon and then continue working with practitioners. And now I'd like to give the floor to Uliana, and Denise will speak after Uliana. So we are happy to see you. So you represent the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, and you were the first institution, the detectives of which actually completed a training in investigative interview back in 2019. You were the first ones. And our today's discussion is about the things that the institution, the managers of the institution could do so that this practice is scaled up on the level of the institution, so that it is institutionalized, so that it is perceived as a norm, as the basic standard of work. Thank you very much for the investigation. I hope you can hear me well. Well, if you remember, it wasn't the year 2019, it was the year 2017 that our investigators completed. That was something organized with the help of our international partners, and our detectives really liked the methodology of investigative interview. If we are talking about the support coming from the institution, I think we have heard this on a number of occasions here. The support of the management is very important when we are talking about the introduction of investigative interview. At the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, starting from 2019, many of us have completed the Ukrainian program, and these detectives joined the groups together with the Security Service of Ukraine representatives, National Police of Ukraine representatives, and the prosecutors. And last year we had a course specifically for the detectives of the National Bureau, and currently for the newly appointed detectives, in order to actually give more opportunities, and of course not everyone can attend all those trainings, but we are having this basic training for the new detectives where we are sharing the main methodologies of work within the National Bureau, and the training includes a course on investigative interview. And I can speak for myself. When I completed that first course, many people feel a bit skeptical. And I, as a manager, I encourage our detectives, and I believe that it's a requirement that all of our detectives complete such trainings on investigative interview. Yes, you first encourage people, and then you set it up as a requirement, and then it's easier to introduce into the work of detectives. Yes, thank you, Uliana. So it's a different experience of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. So you had an intro course on investigative interview, and it's part of the so-called onboarding program. So it's the first program that the new detectives go through after joining the bureau. So I think it's one of those mechanisms that the institution can use. The institution sets some standards for the detectives. Yes, thank you very much, Uliana. And now I'd like to give the floor to Denise. So how are you feeling about the potential institutionalization at the Prosecutor General's office? Good evening, everyone. First of all, thank you for inviting me to join today's event, which is about the promotion and popularizing of investigative interview. And I want to thank JustGroup for being very systemic and consistent in helping the Ukrainian law enforcement system in the introduction of this mechanism. I can only support the colleagues who have already taken the floor before me. It's an important institute. It is being introduced, maybe not at such a high speed as we would like for it to be, but we are doing our best. When we are talking about the introduction of investigative interview at the Prosecutor's General Office, I have to say that I support the following approach, that the prosecutors are more about the law than about the facts. But right now, prosecutors are involved in interviews and in other investigative activities. And the knowledge of investigative interview is really helpful to a prosecutor. If we are talking about some practical steps in the implementation of this institute, then first of all, the Prosecutor General's Office has always been supporting all of the initiatives pertaining to investigative interview. Here we are talking about different manuals and their development. It's the presentation of different translations of existing documents that we have in the sphere, something that may be of use for the prosecutors and investigators. And what is also important, prosecutors are actively involved in trainings on the topic of investigative interview. More than 150 prosecutors have now completed the basic course, and some of them have already completed the advanced course. In particular, we are talking about investigative interview with vulnerable groups of criminal proceedings. So we will continue working in this direction, and I'm convinced that the majority of prosecutors that are involved in procedural oversight of criminal proceedings related to international crimes will be going through this training. And I think the competence of knowledge of investigative interview is part of the matrix of knowledge for all of the prosecutors working in this sphere. And this matrix of competencies will already yield the first results, which will result in a more structured approach in the development of prosecutor's office. And at the Prosecutor General's Office, we have set up a specially equipped room for the conducting of investigative interviews. So we are offering video documentation, and we have borrowed from all the best world practices, and we have started equipping similar rooms at 5 regional prosecutors' offices that are most closely involved in the investigation of international crimes. And we are talking about regions where the security situation allows for that. And we hope that the process will be scaling up and we will have more rooms like that. Another important step is that we have started assessing the results of interviews. So this is something that my colleague Serhii has already mentioned. These are just the first steps, but we will continue doing this because the strategy for the development of prosecutors' offices 2025-2028 foresees such a measure as improvement of testimony, improvement of interviews, and assessment of these interviews. So this track of work has officially become part of the strategy. The strategy is publicly available, and we will actually be introducing some measures to achieve this strategic goal. And I'm convinced that the investigative interview and the assessment of interviews that we have conducted using the investigative interview methodology will show these results. And also we are talking about avoiding a secondary victimization, re-traumatization, and the use of trauma-informed approach. So we are seeing that further introduction of investigative interview methodology will help us achieve this strategic goal. But of course, there's still a lot of work lying ahead of us, and we understand that it will take some time. And just one quick reflection. The correlation between investigative interview and this stick system. So we have to move away from this system where we only have verdicts. So maybe some people need to have just practical advice on how this can help in practical work, because you can have thousands of proceedings that you're working with, and maybe there are some managers that still practice this outdated approach. But I can tell you that there is a direct link between investigative interview and this stick system, the system of trying to reach the verdict stage. An investigative interview helps you get better quality evidence. And as a result, you will get a better result within the criminal proceedings, and the system will be satisfied if it still exists.
Thank you, and thank you for mentioning this element of preparation of infrastructure, because that's what you wrote. It's important to get ready. It's important to have preparation, but it's also important to have infrastructure. We need to have good workplaces where we could conduct those interviews and where we could apply all those standards. So this is another prerequisite that could lead to a high quality of our interviews. And I will probably finish our today's talk with what we started. The changes related to changes in the mindset, worldview, working with biases are the changes that are not happening overnight. We have been all in this process since 2017. We are ready to move on, and it seems to me that it's highly precious that we have completed this evening, and we completed it with having a talk with the managers, with the administrators who are thinking and how to make our changes systemic and sustainable, because otherwise we may not expect any progress and any success. So that's what I wish us to be persistent, to stay together on this path. And I truly believe that at some point in time, the investigative interview will become just a basic norm for in the investigators and prosecutors in Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you for coming to Just Talk. Please follow our announcements on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube. You will have this talk on YouTube. If you have any opinions, ideas, reflections, comments, please feel free to provide them to us, because it's very good when the practitioners from the system of criminal justice voice their opinions, because it's all about our agency. Have a nice evening, and let's have some networking.
Excellent.
Have
Good
a nice
evening.
day. Have a nice day.